Well, welcome everybody. We have the exciting opportunity to spend about a half hour with you here exploring some of the results of the conversation. About 2 years ago, Becky and I got asked by the dean to lead this effort, and you don't say no to requests like that. So we embarked on that, pulled together a steering committee, and developed plans to use strategic foresight practices. You heard Bruce talk about the futuring efforts that we use there. And that's what brought us here today. So the first year or so we spent on what we called phase one of the project, was that externally focused part of the project that we've talked about. Really learning about our external environment, not thinking about who we are and what we do, but what are the needs of the people and the communities and the organizations in Ohio. We asked the question, what will be the most challenging trends and issues for Ohioans by 2035 that drove that part of the conversation. Today our focus is on the second phase. This part of the conversation that we spent learning about visioning and thinking about what might be, what could be, that enabling part that Bruce talked about. We held a lot of conversations around the state where stakeholders and employees had opportunities to share ideas about the needs and opportunities in the future and how those might impact the organization.
We actually had 15 opportunities.
What?
Well, I just wanted to mention that there were a lot of opportunities for people to participate in the visioning sessions.
Right. So, in addition to employees, we talked to lots of other people, volunteers, stakeholders, donors, legislators, community leaders, those sorts of people.
We actually had input from nearly 400 people in our visioning sessions, and about 40% of the participants were external, so not employees of the university.
So I guess you want to help with this part, Becky. So on your table you'll find a copy of this big piece. This is what we want to focus on right now, this big report that you see in the middle. We didn't bring enough for everybody, but we want you to focus on this full report.
Well, actually, Graham, we're going to do something maybe a little more creative than that. You'll also have on your table a more colorful brochure, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So as Graham said...
Hold on. I thought we were going to talk about this full report here. This has got all the details. We're a research-based organization.
I know that that's the kind of report that you feel comfortable with. This is the kind of report that gets me kind of jazzed up. So let's start out with this, but this one is still valid too. This is the full report, and you'll have an opportunity to download that online if you don't have one on your table. So let's take a look at what is involved in the colorful brochure. You'll notice that there is an insert. On one side of the insert, there's a letter from Dean McPherron, Provost McPherron. And then on the back of that are some paradoxes. And let's just set this insert aside. We're going to talk about this in just a few minutes. Now, you might notice when you look at the brochure that there's a picture of a road on the front. And one of the things that was clear to us as we were looking at the data, we were sifting through all of the data and we started talking with folks in the visioning session, is that it seemed like all of this information was going to take us on a journey. And so it was going to take us on a journey of discovery, but together we were going to be on a trip into the future. So are you still with me, Graham?
Journey, sure. I like a good road trip. I'm with you.
So if you open the brochure one fold, and if you look at the slide in the back there, it'll kind of give you an idea of how we want you to use this brochure. So if you open it up just one fold, you'll see the elements of the first phase of the project along the left panel. So all of those things that Provost McPherron talked about us doing last year, the figuring out what the trends were and the trend research, and that took us to the visioning phase. And you'll see that we started the visioning phase with by asking folks what we thought folks would need in the future. And those are listed along the right side of the panel of the brochure.
What are the symbols at the bottom there? I heard the new provost talking about those symbols. What do those mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. These are symbols that you'll find throughout the brochure that we hope will encourage those people who are using the brochure to engage further in the ideas. After all, we're an educational organization, and these exercises give us the opportunity to continue to learn more and share what we know. So as you open the brochure one more fold, you'll see that we begin to share more information. You might remember that we asked folks to think about the needs of Ohioans in 2035 based on those scenario videos. Do you remember those, Graham?
Yep, I remember them. 3 alternative futures, right?
Right. After folks viewed those videos and determined what Ohioans might need, we challenged them to begin to think about what educational opportunities that might provide for our organization. So what might all of those needs mean for us? Those ideas are shared along the left and right sides of the brochure panels. So let's open the brochure all the way now. So you've got it flat in front of you.
Looks like a map to me for our
Yes.
journey, right? You talked about a journey, okay, a map, journey.
Right.
Since this is news to me and I prefer this report that you had like this, I think you better explain how we're going to use this map here.
Okay. Well, we'll go through each one of the elements on the map. We like the idea of symbolism, and we've kind of carried the idea of a journey throughout the brochure. So, for instance, if you look at the road that kind of goes through the brochure, that represents our delivery methods, so how we share our educational information.
How do we go about determining what is on the road there?
Well, the information that's on the road, as well as all of the other parts of the brochure, was determined by the participants in our visioning sessions.
So our steering committee didn't decide what to put there?
No. Our steering committee had nothing to do with what to put there. In fact, most of our steering committees didn't even participate in the visioning sessions. Everything in this brochure and in the full brochure, the one that's your favorite, were generated from the participants in the visioning sessions.
The 400 people you mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly, those
Okay.
400 people. So as you travel along this road, you'll see that there are some green road signs that say guiding principles. These are recurring themes that were mentioned by several people over and over again. These seemed important. In fact, a lot of people considered them essential elements for our organization's success. So these guiding principles represent the ideals and practices that folks considered very important for our organization's current and future success and sustainability.
Makes sense so far. There's a lot to digest here, so a couple more questions. That right in the middle, there's a bunch of road signs that are pointing all different directions. Can you help me out with what those mean?
Yes, those represent the logistics of how we might need to work in the future. So in other words, what will we need to consider and incorporate into our work to be successful and effective?
Okay, I think I'm starting to figure it out. What about the balloons on the bottom right? So those represent what we want our reputation to be, right?
Yes, good, Graham. You're catching on, exactly. So this is starting to make sense to you.
Okay. How about the books? There's a big stack of books in the middle there.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that because that's kind of at the heart of what we do, right? Those are the scope of the educational programs and resources that we offer. Like everything else on the map, these things were determined by the participants. So it's important to remember, just as Dean McFerrin said earlier, this information is not constraining. This is just sort of a jumping off point. This represents the ideas, the very broad ideas that were shared by the participants in the visioning sessions. And in order to come up with all the information on the map, we sifted through more than 3,000 data points. So it represents a very, very synthesized, very high level representation of all that info. You'll find more details in the full report. That's your favorite report, Graham. And as you mentioned earlier, we have a few copies of that on the table, but we also have a link in the brochure so you can download the full report if you want to share it in a digital format or if you want to download it and share it with others.
One thing I'd like to go back to before we get people talking a little bit is the paradoxical tensions. They're on the back of the note from Bruce McFerrin. Can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Yes. As we were sifting through all of those points of data, we noticed that there seemed to be ideas that were contradictory, but were all very relevant and important for us to incorporate. We knew that we had to include these tensions in our report. So you can see a list of the paradoxical tensions on the inside of the brochure near the one-way sign, kind of right as you open it up. And then there's a longer description of each of those on the back of the insert.